Record. All righty. Landon McCool of Locked On Cowboys fame. Appreciate you hopping on with me this afternoon. Like we were just saying, it's a big day
Mhm.
in the NFL world, but it's a big day for the Cowboys picking 12th overall. Their best slot in the draft since 2021 when they picked up Micah Parsons. So just in my, coverage of what it seems like the Cowboys might do in the last couple of days, everything I'm reading is they want an impact offensive player, somebody who's going to have the ball in their hands, running back, mostly wide receiver kind of thing. What kind of stuff? I mean, you probably have more inside sources. You definitely have more inside sources than me. So what kind of stuff have you been seeing leading up to today?
Well, I will say that, this is the week where you start hearing the nonsense, right? Like you hear, for weeks and weeks and weeks, kind of the same stuff being thrown into the water, the same folks saying the same thing. And then we get to draft week and it's like, oh, here's eight new names that you really had never considered the Cowboys taking at 12, but this is what I'm hearing. And sometimes, actually, I would say most of the time when you hear that, it's smoke, right? This is smoke screen season. It's time to kind of throw chum in the water, as we say, baiting, whether it's trying to, obfuscate like what you were planning on doing, or in some cases trying to chum the water in the in sense for a trade, right? Trying to entice, bait the hook for somebody to come up and potentially want to trade for your spot to give you some picks. And I think that's a lot what's going on right now with the Cowboys. If I had to guess right now, I would, in a, just kind of a power ranking situations, right? I would think that the Cowboys best, the best opportunity they would view is an opportunity to trade down. I think the value of this draft is a little bit later. I think it's very clear that we've been talking about this throughout this process, that this is not a top heavy draft. The opportunity to kind of have more bites at that apple a little bit later in the draft. And then on top of the fact that the Cowboys are also missing their fourth round pick after the Trey Lance trade. So I think that if the Cowboys had their way, they would get a small little trade back, potentially picking up another top 100 pick. And then at that point, maybe somewhere in the high 20s, late teens, or wherever they trade back, I think it really opens things up for your selections, and I think everybody's on the table at that point, right? Like even the names that we're starting to hear, like we started to hear names like Walter Nolan and Gray Zabel and Kelvin Banks is a name that wasn't necessarily thrown around with the Cowboys, but you're starting to hear more and more. So I do think that if the Cowboys had their chance, they would trade back, and then that would open up their options, get more picks. If they can't do it, because it seems like a lot of teams are trying to trade back right now, I think they stick and pick, and I do think it's probably a wide receiver, probably Tetro McMillan if he's there. Matthew Golden, Ibuka, I think is another guy that they would all consider there at 12.
So, yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting you say that because honestly, I hadn't really considered. I was just kind of looking at it from the lens of, oh wow, this is their best pick since they got Micah Parsons. They could really pick up an impact guy. But no, I mean, what you're saying makes sense. Obviously, kind of the personnel of this class, maybe they're not super top heavy, but I guess if the opportunity isn't there to draft down or to trade down, like you were saying, you mentioned a couple of names there. Who's a guy you think that the Cowboys, I guess maybe two things. Who's the guy that you would take, and then who's the guy the Cowboys kind of seem to be most interested in?
Well, I mean, I would take. I think the Cowboys have a couple different needs that they need to fill. I think the most difficult one to fill, outside of the first round, would be a secondary pass catching weapon. Obviously, wide receiver two is the kind of shorthand for that. But honestly, I wouldn't limit it to that. I mean, I think I love Tyler Warren, who's a tight end from Penn State. I don't know that the Cowboys are necessarily interested in him, but I do think that he's just a playmaker with the ball in his hand. He's got an elite skill set. Penn State ran their entire offense through him, which is pretty rare for a tight end in college. And he's just a kind of guy who Dak could get the ball to in short yardage situations, or just easy situations, pitch and catch, and let him pick up yards after the catch. And then on top of that, he would be a kind of a top blocker as well as a tight end, obviously. But I mean, I think for the Cowboys, like the names we mentioned before, Tetro McMillan, Matthew Golden, these are all guys who, even though they're very stylistically different players from each other, I think they both would fit in a role as a wide receiver too for the Cowboys, just in different ways. Tetro McMillan is more of your classic X receiver, kind of isolated on the backside of the formation by himself, bigger body guy that has a huge catch radius. And then Golden is more of the separator guy, the guy that can probably play a little bit more Z. He can play in the slot if you need him to, but he has the kind of speed and a skill to create separation in the route, catch the ball. I don't think he always. I mean, I think a lot of people have said this. I don't think he necessarily has shown his game to play up to that kind of 4.29 speed that we saw at the combine, but that doesn't mean that he's not incredibly fast and not able to take the top off of defenses, which I think he has shown that he can do.
And then, another big name, one of the bigger names in the draft, and, one that you kind of see kind of everywhere on mock drafts. Nobody can really seem to decide, where he's going to fall, I guess. But it's Ashton Genty. I
Hmm.
mean, if he were to fall to 12, well, I guess, is this even a relevant conversation to have? Is there a possibility that could happen? If that did happen, would the Cowboys be interested?
I think it's hard for me to sit here and poo poo any situation as to there's no way that could happen. I mean, I've watched too many of these drafts to sit here and say there's no way that could happen and still believe it. Like it's just these things are crazy, and these teams view these players so wildly different than the media and then all of us individually at home. They just have so much more resources, right? Um, the problem with Genty is only about his position, right? Like the positional value of running backs and where you want to take it. He is, without a doubt, the best running back in this class, and is one of the very few kind of true blue chip players in this class. From what we've heard, there are several teams in the NFL that have Genty as the best player in this class. Which, I mean, if you're just stacking them by, you know, talent at their position, I don't think that that's outrageous to say. So, having said all of that, the talent dictates, a top 5 to 7 pick. I mean, I think it's again positional value is the only reason that we aren't just surefire locking him into 3 or 4, really. I mean, honestly, like after Carter comes off the board, if we're just stacking talented players, I mean, why isn't he just in the conversation with top five? It's only about the fact that drafting a running back in the top five, it doesn't make a ton of economic sense. It doesn't make a lot of positional value sense. But again, he's so good that I think it's likely to happen. If he if he were to fall to the Cowboys at 12, I mean, obviously the Cowboys have a need at running back. I mean, I think that they probably would pick him. I hope that they kind of probably would pick him, especially if they had him rated high. I don't love the idea generally of taking a running back in the first round, but I don't think this is like a Zeke situation where you're taking him at 4 overall, or even really, and honestly, taking Zeke at 4 overall wasn't a bad thing. But I think signing him to that second deal is where that's where the kind of economics of things don't really make a lot of sense, and just the difference between the money between 12 where you would be picking and 4 where you picked Zeke is significant, right? And to the point where you're talking about either paying him at 12 somewhere in the middle of the pack of free agent running backs, but at 4 you're talking about paying him top 3 running backs in the NFL, which maybe Genty is that right away, but it's still a lot of money to invest in a running back, while you have a very expensive quarterback. You're about to pay a very expensive edge rusher. You've got a very expensive running wide receiver.
All things to consider there. It is so interesting, kind of. I'm obviously growing up as like a young football fan. I could never wrap my head around, running backs being like one of the best players in the league for 2, 3 years, and then them kind of dropping off. I couldn't wrap my head around that. But I mean, it's just kind of the reality of the position and of the sport, I guess. Obviously, it's tough out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are guys. Obviously, I mean, we've seen it like that. Last year was a great example. Saquon Barkley came in and took the league by storm, and you've got guys that are kind of a little bit longer the two still performing, but they are still the exception to the rule. And I think that I think a lot of people looked at what happened with the Giants and Saquon Barkley, and I'm a Cowboys fan. I love to see the Giants be embarrassed. I'm okay with that, but to their credit, like they weren't in a situation to make Saquon Barkley work the way the Eagles were, right? Like I think that that's a key part about all of this is that running back is one of those positions that in order to kind of fully get the value that you want out of the position, you're pretty reliant on some other positions to be performing well, specifically the offensive line. So the Giants didn't have the offensive line to get all the juice out of Saquon. The Eagles do. I think the Cowboys in their situation, they're probably halfway between those two, right? Like I feel like they definitely have some good pieces. They have some guys that you feel like you can build on, but I don't know if it's quite to the point in the team building exercise where you're ready to just put the running back cherry on top of this thing yet. I still think there's some team building that's left to do.
Yeah. And then I guess kind of bringing it back to something that, you talked about in the beginning, maybe the strength of this draft class not necessarily being the top talent, but kind of being its depth.
Yeah.
So, thinking about if the Cowboys do trade down, or even if they don't, I mean, you mentioned they don't have their fourth round pick, but they have subsequent picks, obviously. So what kind of things do you think that they would target in those kind of later stage picks?
So I think, normally with the top 3 to 4 picks, depending on where you are, you're trying to target, starters, guys to come in and immediately be contributors on offense, on defense. That starts to fade as you get to the third and fourth round. At that point, you start to hope to get contributors, guys who could come in as a part of a rotation. Maybe they can develop into something, or depending on what the position is, like running back, especially in this class, you could easily draft a guy in the third or fourth round. They could come in and be your running back one. That's just the way the class is. That's just the way positional value is. I think the what we're talking about on day 3 at this point are special teams players, are rotational depth pieces, upside plays on guys who maybe aren't quite fully developed, but you can squint and kind of see a play with a lot of upside there. I think I wouldn't be. I think the key thing with to think about with day 3 is what can you do for our team, while you're learning to do the kind of main part of your job, right? Like I've been looking a lot more recently about, since they've made the changes to the kickoff rules and the kickoff return rules, the shift in body types that is happening on special teams, right? It's a lot less of these corners and safeties and speed guys and wide receiver types that are playing on these outside because they're not running as far. You're seeing more of these tight end bodies, linebacker bodies. So that's what I would look at, is like kind of the more and Mike McCarthy talked about this last year, and I don't know that this is, even though he's gone, I don't know that this is a change necessarily. You can't have enough of those kind of 6'3" to 6'5", 240 to 260 pound bodies on this roster because they can fill out those special teams. So even though the Cowboys have a ton of tight ends, I wouldn't be shocked if they took another one. Even though it seems like they've got a lot of linebacker depth, wouldn't be shocked if they looked at a couple more, just because I think those are guys who can contribute in some form or fashion right away. And then outside of that, upside plays, athletes who maybe are unrefined that need a little bit of work, especially with this new coaching staff. I think that they're going to put a huge emphasis on teaching and about leveraging these coaches that they brought in from college that they feel like are specifically good teachers. So I would look for a bunch of upside plays to kind of use that coaching staff and take advantage of that coaching staff, see if they can't find a diamond in the rough in the later rounds.
Awesome. Man, great stuff. I mean, I feel like that's kind of all I got, unless I kind of want to just throw it out to you. Anything that, maybe people haven't been talking about that, think needs to be talked about as we enter draft day, or anything that's kind of on your mind, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess my message right now, especially for Cowboys fans who've been through, it's been a rough offseason. I think, for all of us, just to kind of the news hasn't always been great, and obviously the last season wasn't great. My whole approach to the draft is a seeking to understand as opposed to being understood. I think a lot of folks kind of get real myopic on the players that they think that this should be the pick or that they really like. And when their draft plans don't come to fruition, they get mad instead of trying to like understand why the Cowboys may have done this or that, or to try to understand the reasoning. I have found that, just for my sanity, that it's a lot easier to consume it in the sense of, okay, it's interesting they drafted this guy. I want to understand why. Like I want to understand a little bit. And sometimes when they draft a guy, when it's CeeDee Lamb, you're like, I don't need to be told why. I get this. Great pick. Fantastic. But sometimes when I don't understand the pick, or it's a pick that I don't have the same, that I personally don't have the same value on that player, I think it's, even though it's easy for us to blame the Cowboys and easy, to see that they've made mistakes, I think it's also egotistical on my part to suggest that I know more or better than the Cowboys or have more information than the Cowboys do. So, whatever the pick happens, I like to take a deep breath and try to at least listen to the reasoning here before I go absolutely nuclear and tell everyone it was a terrible pick.
Awesome, man. It's yeah, it's true. The knee jerk reaction is typically a strong one, and it's not
Yeah,
always a
for
positive
sure.
one. So
For
that's a
sure.
great point to bring up. Awesome. Well, all right. Well, I think that's like I said, I think that's kind of all I got for you. Really appreciate you hopping on today.
Great, man.